Welcome back to Collapse Life. This is Zahra Sethna, your host. When rules become absurd, circumvention is often a better option than compliance. And that's something that our guest, John Moody, knows a lot about. John started a food buying club when he couldn't get the kinds of foods he wanted for himself and his family. And in fact, it was the first food buying club in America to be raided by authorities. Now he helps others set up their own clubs, he farms, and he helps others find ways to legally beat the government at its own game. Welcome, John. Thanks for being here.
Hey, thank you for having me.
So I'm very excited because I think we have lots of interesting things to talk about. But I wanted to start with your own story. From what I have heard, you started out going to seminary school and then you got sick and now you're a rogue farmer. So tell us a little bit. I don't think it's a straight path. So tell us a little bit of that story.
Yeah, so the 90-second elevator pitch. I grew up as standard American as you could possibly imagine. Eating Cheerios and Fruity Pebbles on Saturday morning while watching 3 straight hours of cartoons. That kind of just processed food, video games, cartoon lifestyle. I went to seminary starting in 2000 for my master's degree, and I always thought I was a very healthy person, because I'm not overweight. I played sports in high school and college. It's like, I'm a really healthy person, even though I have constant dental decay. Even though I have seasonal allergies so bad, Benadryl sends me stock options at the end of every year because of my patronage. I know, even though I've had enough antibiotics to be qualified as my own CAFO animal operator. I'm such a healthy person. And then one day when I was working on my master's, I just started having horrible pain in the center of my body. Just that's kind of weird. And the pain did not get better. It got worse. It got worse. It got worse on my 6'2" frame. I got down easily below 120 pounds, just totally disappeared when I turned sideways. And I go to a doctor and I find out I have ulcers. And the doctor's like, hey, this is no big deal. Lots of people your age have stuff like this. And I'm like,
Really?
Lots of 22, 23-year-old guys have debilitating chronic digestive issues. That's what you're telling me. He's like, he's like, well, we could put you on these medications. I'm just saying, I'm like, so you're telling me that the only way we can fix this is for me to be on highly complex medications that stop my body from doing things it was designed to do for the rest of my life.
Mm-hmm.
And do you even know what side effects these medications are going to have? So through getting really, really sick, I discovered the work of Sally Fallon and Weston A. Price and similar people on, traditional foods and, food as medicine.
Mm-hmm.
And my then fiance, my now wife, and I, we over the course of a year completely retooled where we got food, what we considered food, how we prepared food, just the whole 9 yards.
Wow. And so is that when you became a farmer?
No, so we were living in Louisville in an apartment at the time, and we went from shopping at Walmart and Sam's Club to shopping at Wild Oats and Whole Paycheck.
Mm-hmm.
And I started going into these stores. My undergraduate degree was in mathematics and business finance.
Mm-hmm.
And we're in a Whole Foods or Wild Oats, and I'm looking at the meat counter. And, this is back in 2006,
Wow.
give or take. And chicken breast in the meat counter, it's like $12 a pound. And my first thought is, I'm going to have 3 jobs to afford to feed a family this kind of food.
Right.
And my second thought was, I knew, the USDA does, they keep track of how much money consumers spend on food and how much farmers actually get.
Mm-hmm.
Guess what percentage of each dollar of food people spend actually gets back to farmers.
I bet it's less than 10%.
It's less, it's around 50, in really good years, it's like 18 cents on the dollar. In most years, it's probably 16. And obviously there's some variance by product category and whatnot.
Yeah.
And so I'm looking at this chicken. I'm just like, if the farmer was paid $2 a pound for this, where are the other $10?
Right.
Like, where is the other $10 here? Where did it go?
Mm-hmm.
And so my wife had a cousin who lived in Iowa who had like a food buying club. And, my wife's like, hey, we could start one of these in Louisville. And I was like, no, I was getting ready to go do a PhD. I was like, I don't have time to start a food buying club because I'm getting ready to do a PhD program. And obviously you see that I was not successful in doing the PhD, but we were successful at doing the buying club instead. And so we started Whole Life Buying Club in 2006. And the club now, and we're just 2 years away from being 20 years old. And we started the club both because we knew that when we were shopping at most stores, the farmers were getting very little of the money we were spending. Mm-hmm. And we also knew a lot of the stuff in the stores was not what they said it was.
Right.
But then also, we went from shopping at Wild Oats and Whole Foods. We signed up for our first CSA. We started getting raw milk from a local farmer. And we started going to the farmers markets. And at the farmers markets, I'd meet all these farmers. I'd be like, hey, have your animals been given antibiotics? And they'd be like, well, of course they've been given antibiotics. Like, how could you raise animals with antibiotics? Like, well, have you sprayed your apples? Well, of course I spray my apples. There's no other way to raise apples. And I'd look at these farmers and I'd be like, how long has this spray been around? When was this spray invented? So you're telling me before 1958, nobody could grow apples in this entire part of the country because this spray did not exist. That's what you're going to really tell me with a straight face. And the farmers would get offended that I would suggest that maybe you actually didn't need all of these modern chemical interventions to grow food. And so I finally got frustrated. I was like, fine, I'm just going to buy some land and show them you can do these things.
Right.
That's how we ended up buying, 30 acres outside of Louisville. And, we don't really farm, we homestead. Farmers are people who, for their livelihood, raise food. We primarily raise food for ourselves. And then I use that, what we do to educate farmers and educate others. But I'd never refer to myself as like a vocational farmer.
Got it. So a couple of follow-up questions. First of all, on your health issues, did you ever treat them with a pharmaceutical product? Did you treat them with food? Have they gone away?
Well, I started on a brief course of Nexium because I was just in so much pain. That, I couldn't even function to the point of like doing other things to get better. So I think I was on Nexium, though, I was supposed to be on Nexium basically indefinitely.
For the rest of your life, yeah.
And I think I dropped off of Nexium probably after 8 or 10 weeks.
Perfect. And then
I still remember.
Food solved the rest of the problem.
Yeah. Well, and not, like my seasonal allergies gone. I have not had a new dental cavity in over 20 some years now. When I went back to my doctor, I walked into his office for like a 6-month or 9-month checkup or whatever. And I'm like, hey, I no longer have this condition. And he's like, well, have you been taking your medicine? I'm like, no, I actually haven't taken my medicine since like May or something, and I'm like, I told him, I was able to fix this problem through food. And he looked at me like I was an alien. He's just like, this is not possible.
Right.
The human body cannot heal itself with food.
No.
He probably had a similar look on his face to the farmer at the farmer's market when you told him he didn't have to spray his apples.
Oh, yeah. Well, I remember because when the doctor... Hey, sir, you have to be quiet or you have to go, okay? So you can sit quietly with me. I know. I love you too. I remember when he was first doing his first visit, and he said, well, we're going to give you this pharmaceutical.
Dad.
And I asked him what the pharmaceutical was going to do to me. Like, how did the pharmaceutical actually work?
Mhm.
He's like, well, I don't know how it works. And he grabs the drug insert
Mhm.
and he looks up, he goes, oh, this shuts off your body's ability to produce hydrochloric acid. And
Okay.
I looked at him and I said, if my body is designed to produce hydrochloric acid, what will happen to me
Mhm.
if you make my body stop doing something it was designed to do?
Mhm.
And he stopped and he goes, I've never once thought about the human body this way.
Wow.
And nobody in all of my years of being a doctor has ever asked me this question.
And probably the most obvious answer is, well, you won't get an ulcer, but who knows what else might happen. I mean, and if he
Well,
had to look at the package insert to figure out even how the drug works, that's basic information that he should have at his fingertips now.
well, and we know what happens because protease inhibitors, this whole class of drugs,
Yeah.
well, why does your body produce hydrochloric acid? It's what cleaves proteins so your body can actually absorb them.
Mhm.
And it's also what kills off a wide array of pathogenic bacteria before they can reach your lower intestines. And now you have people, you can go look it up online. You have people taking poop pills because protease inhibitors, this combination of protease inhibitors and antibiotic use sets people's digestive systems to be overran by improper microflora and other microorganisms.
Yeah.
It's just like, our whole medical system is built around working against rather than with our bodies.
Yeah.
And
It
it's just
is.
a complete and total disaster.
Absolutely. And so much of everything that we experience in terms of dis-ease is centered in our gut and how we eat. So, something that we talk about a lot on Collapse Life. And one of the reasons why we wanted to talk to you. So, and my other follow-up question was just to give a little more detail about what is a food buying club? How do they work?
Oh, goodness. So there's no one way they work. The central idea is it's an alternative way to access food
Mhm.
outside of grocery stores. So when I first wanted to help other people become healthier through food, I started looking at, well, how do people get food? Well, people get food from grocery stores. And as Joel Salatin has pointed out, it's really, really weird because like the first grocery store didn't even open until like the mid 1900s or something, or early
Mhm.
19. You're like, so this model of grocery stores, one reason when you walk into a grocery store today, you will see a bank and you will see cigarettes and alcohol, and you'll see somebody trying to sell you vaccines and an eyeglass place,
Mm.
is because this model, there's no money in food,
Right.
especially like actual food in the grocery store, which is the minority of the aisles that you are going to come across.
Yeah.
Um, and that's because the regulatory, the way the food system is structured in America. Really good book on this by a guy by the name of Ra Patel called Stuffed and Starved.
Mhm.
I don't agree with everything Ra says, but it's a really good book for just understanding, just the nature of like how the food system is structured and
Yeah.
incentives. And so I was like, well, I could never do a grocery store because especially offering real food with the overhead and regulatory burden of a grocery store is just about impossible.
Right.
So I was like, well, how can you do food? Well, what if I don't sell food to people? What if instead of selling food to people, I provide a service to people of giving them greater access to real food?
Mhm.
And that's how we avoid the regulatory burden that the federal government and state health departments and other things needlessly put on small businesses and operations. And it's like for our buying club, you have to truly be a member of the club. And to even further kind of solidify how we differ from the mainstream, at a grocery store, they spent their money, they buy something, they mark it up, and they sell it to you.
Yeah.
At our food buying club, you give me your money, you tell me what you want, I go get it, there's a service fee for that, and then I give you, but I'm never selling you things at the
Right. It's a
buying.
perk of membership, essentially.
Yeah. Well, again, it's a service. The buying club is this service rather than a place that sells stuff.
Got it. So what happened when the club got raided?
Oh, goodness. So it was Memorial Day weekend, 2011. And they showed up and served us cease and desist and quarantine orders, primarily because this was at the height of a war that the federal government had declared on local food, and especially raw milk, that had started in the mid to late 1990s and crescendoed from about 2008 until about 2014, where they finally faced enough counter opposition from me and a whole bunch of people I'm friends with, where they finally realized it was just going to be too costly for them to really wage this ceaseless warfare. So we were served cease and desist and quarantine orders, threatened with jail and super, super large fines. And
For what? For what offense?
For distributing raw milk.
So raw milk was the lever, not the other things that you were providing.
Yeah, and the reason is the reason the government cares so much about meat and milk. So if you look where they put all of their regulatory effort, it's around meat and milk. Well, why is so much of their effort focused on meat and milk? Because if you change where people buy their meat and milk, you tend to change a huge swath of their budget. So like a person who buys raw milk is eventually going to be buying pastured eggs from some small local farmer's chicken flock. And they're going to be buying local vegetables, not that 87-day-old vegetables on a shelf. So it changes a person's world over time when you change certain key things. And so the government knew that milk was, and also it's, like when people start drinking raw milk and they don't die immediately, like the government's been telling them is going to happen for decades,
right?
Even though their great grandparents never. One of my favorite stories about raw milk is in the Kentucky legislature, we had a raw milk bill, probably around 2014. And our sponsor for the bill got up on the floor and he goes, "How many of you here today drank raw milk as children?" And something like 3/4 of the legislative chamber raised their hands. And he goes, "Isn't it interesting that you all are the only ones who survived?"
Yeah.
And so when people begin to drink raw milk and they're like, "I'm not like dying." Then they begin to think things like, what else did the government lie to me about?
Yeah.
What other things have maybe I've been told details that don't actually match reality?
Right. What else have they done sort of fear mongering about that really isn't something to be afraid of?
And this is the other reason milk and meat are so big, because people begin to really rapidly begin to ask questions about antibiotics and vaccines and other pharmaceuticals. And so if you can stop people before they cross that bridge, you're able to hold this cultural line with them. So they rated us. We weren't the first club in the nation to be rated,
Okay.
but we were the first one to be rated and actually walk away winners. There have been a number of other organizations before us, like Rossum out in California, Mana Storehouse in Ohio, Athens Locally Grown. Kristen Canty has a great documentary called Farmageddon that talks about a bunch of these stories.
Right.
But we were one of the first groups in this, really like decades long battle to be rated and walk away, not just with a draw, but with a very, very clear victory, and really giving the health department a black eye and a bloody nose. And
Talk about that. How were you pre-armed, or was it a bit of luck? What happened?
well, so another funny story. Before I proposed to my wife, we were sitting at dinner one day, and she thought most likely I was going to propose to her this day at dinner. Poor girl. And instead I look at her and I say, just so you know, one day I'm going to go to jail. So imagine you're dating like some guy who's in his early mid-20s, and casually over, a dinner date, he's like, oh, and by the way, I'm going to become a criminal one day. And so I always knew that like my personality and other things were probably going to put me on the wrong side of government. Didn't quite expect it to be in this area. And then, when I started the buying club in 2006, I had already been part of the protests against the National Animal Identification System, which they're trying to bring back. And so I always knew that it was not statistically unlikely that if the buying club was even moderately successful, eventually the government was going to try and do something about it.
Sure.
So I wasn't unprepared for it to happen, but I always tell people it's still a real, I train judo and jujitsu, been training for 7-8 years now. And, there's the theory of like having a 220-pound man on top of you trying to choke you out or trying to like snap one of your limbs. And you can think about that, and you can think about, oh, how would I deal with that? And then there's the reality of like last night, I'm sparring with a 220-pound man who has his arm around my neck because his goal is to put me to sleep. And I'm not a 3-year-old, and so you can mentally prepare for this kind of stuff. But there's still that first moment of like, at the time when we were raided, I would have had a 6-year-old daughter, a 5-year-old son, and a pregnant wife. And am I really going to risk going to jail over raw milk?
Yeah.
So I always tell people like, you need to mentally and otherwise prepare for these situations. But you're still going to experience that kind of gut punch, like, because now we're truly in the fight. We're no longer thinking, we're no longer just practicing moves. Now the 220-pound man wants to take my arm home. And what am I going to do about it? So, we were able to beat them basically by, the government loves to isolate an individual and make an example of them. That's their strength. Their strength is government versus one person. And so the way we had so much success, starting with our club and then a lot of other people, 2011 forward, is instead of me breaking the cease and desist and quarantine, I convinced 95% of the members to do it. Because now, what's the Kentucky Health Department going to do? Are they going to arrest a mom and dad in 120 families
Mhm.
over milk.
Mhm.
Can
It's
you
not
imagine?
good PR for them.
Yeah, can you imagine the headlines? Like
Yeah.
Kentucky courts overwhelmed with 300 people charged with misdemeanor offense for taking milk that belonged to them from a cow they have a partial ownership. And that was also part of my strategy for defeating the public health department, where I went on all of these, both when we were calling legislators and other elected officials, and then when I was going on radio and other shows, I would frame it as Kentucky has one of the highest rates of obesity in the nation. Kentucky has some of the highest rates of smoking in the nation. Kentucky is a health disaster. And the health department thinks it is the best use of their resources to go after the healthiest families in the Commonwealth.
Right.
The people who are supporting local farmers, who take their health seriously, and who are making an informed choice about what they eat. Oh, they're the public health. They're the public health priority.
Mhm.
Um, and so I just made their life really, really miserable. Just every chance I got, I wanted them to look like clowns,
Yeah.
the clowns that they were being. That just like what they're doing was just so stupid, so dumb, such a
Right.
waste of time, such a waste of resources. Um, yeah.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of how that went down.
It goes back to what I said in the intro, which is that when rules become so absurd, it's better to circumvent them than to try and comply, which is sort of the motto or the inspiration behind your Rogue Food Conference, which you're co-organizing with Joel Salatin, correct?
Yeah. Joel and I were having lunch together probably around 2017 or 18. And Joel looked at me and he goes, just once, I want to go to a conference where instead of them teaching me and telling me how to jump through the newest set of regulatory hoopla and page 87 of code 45 of subsection D of points R through JJJ. He's like, I want to go somewhere where people will tell me how not to comply.
Mhm.
What other options are on the table? And I looked at Joel and I go, Joel, nobody is ever going to put this conference on.
Mhm.
Because if you go to any agricultural food conference, who are all the sponsors of the conference? Well, it's Cargill and Monsanto and your state agricultural department and
Yeah.
Farm Bureau. Like, none of these people want food choice.
Mhm.
And Joel looks at me and he gets his Joel grin and he hikes up his suspenders and he goes, well, then we will put on this conference. And so the conference really highlights ideas and models that work in food and farming, but can work beyond food and farming. So we have like doctors and chiropractors and all sorts of other people who come to Rogue Food because they're interested in, could I use a PMA for this? Could I use a private buying club type arrangement to do, say you want to be a chef, say you've always wanted to run a restaurant. Restaurants are a disaster economically, especially for the people who try and run them. But what if you could do a dinner club where you cook out of somebody's house and people pay a monthly subscription to come out to dinner with you twice a month to this dinner club? And you have, and so you're only chefing 2 nights a week for 30 people each night.
Mhm.
And you're able to make, $800 a week working part-time, and you're able to deliver great quality food to these people because you don't have the regulatory and all the other ridiculous overhead.
Mhm.
And in this situation, you also don't have employees and employment law and the Fair Department of Labor. Like you just don't have all of this stuff anymore.
all the stuff that burdens the small farmer or the small business owner so much that it actually becomes, for some people, it becomes the end of the business. But for some people, it becomes so intimidating that they don't even start the business to begin
Yeah.
with.
Well, and you've probably heard Joel talk about this. The worst part of our current regulatory structure is it completely stifles creation and innovation.
Mhm.
Because we had a rogue elderberry syrup business for a number of years. And when we started our elderberry syrup business, we would sanitize our whole kitchen, and my daughter would make like 20 bottles of elderberry syrup to sell. And
Mhm.
I've been to other local kitchens at restaurants in my area. I would put our home kitchen up against any restaurant within 30 miles of my house.
Mhm.
Which is what's great, because for us to have a certified kitchen on our farm, the regulator said that my children would graduate college long before we paid off the cost of building the kitchen.
I'm not
Wow.
going to college.
And so there's, so people just don't realize. I remember when I was over in Greece, traveling Greece and Turkey for a month back in probably 2004, very long time ago now. Might have been 2003.
Mhm.
And we went to the island of Idra. And all of the restaurants were basically people's houses.
Yeah.
And at lunchtime or at dinner time, whatever those people that day wanted to make available to the public, they'd usually have a very big front porch area on their house.
Mhm.
And the front room of their house was flexible space where it's family space when they want it to be family space. But hey, if tonight we're doing food for people, they pull out some extra beautiful chairs and tables. And these are like completely unregulated family restaurants
Right.
and businesses
Right.
ran right out of the front of their homes.
Right.
And the food was amazing. And it's the mom and dad and kids all, the kids are the servers.
Mhm.
Mom and dad are both cooking. And I'm just like, why can't we have this in America? Like I don't want to go to Taco Bell. I want to be able to drive down the street and a real Mexican family that lives in my neighborhood produce real actual Mexican food I can eat.
Is it seems to me that a system like what you just described on that small island in Greece is built on trust. So, if people go to that restaurant and they come away feeling ill a few times in a row, they'll stop going.
Yeah.
Word will spread, and people will just not, that business, so-called business, will just not survive. But when you can trust that that person is doing the best that they can and pouring love and quality into that food, then they will thrive for many generations. And here we've become so polarized and so separated from each other. And then the government with its regulations have taken that place of us just knowing one another and being able to trust one another. And they've said, no, trust us. We will tell you what's safe. Is that, am I hitting on something here?
Yeah, well, Joel and I have talked about this for years. Modern meat processing plants. Do you know what is the defining feature of their architecture?
I do not.
They have no windows.
Ugh.
Why do modern meat processing operations have no windows where you can look in and see what's going on? So really, what creates trust? Well, transparency. If I run a restaurant out of my home, when you walk in, you will immediately know the cleanliness.
Yeah.
So like the restaurants we ate at in Greece, especially the family type cafes, transparency is what builds trust in economic relationships. So like the farms that supply my buying club, we're picking up from sometimes on a weekly basis. We see exactly what is going on these farms.
Right.
And so the government actually purposely hinders transparency. They reward a lack of transparency so that instead of building direct relationships built on transparency that produce trust, you turn to them instead. Because again, you're looking at buildings with no windows. You can't see anything.
Yeah.
You have no idea what's going on anymore.
Yeah. You mentioned a few minutes ago the acronym PMAs. I want to go back to that and define what that is, because I know that that's actually a theme that you're bringing to the upcoming Rogue Food Conference and actually hosting a debate on this topic. So talk about PMAs, what they are, why there's a debate.
Yeah, so a PMA is a private member association. PMAs have a long history in U.S. law and jurisprudence. And especially during Rona and all of the craziness of Rona, a lot of people got really, really interested in them for a whole bunch of different reasons. And over the 4 years of Rogue Food, we've probably had 3 or 4 different people so far speak about private member associations. And they've all at times given some conflicting opinions and thoughts. And Joel and I just thought to ourselves, well, this would be a great issue to put a whole bunch of people up on stage. And on Friday, we're going to let each of them kind of present their basic case for what they think PMAs are and what all you can do with them. And then on Saturday, we're going to hit them with hard questions and let them ask each other hard questions and have some real good, because Joel and I, one of the worst parts about where we find ourselves culturally is an inability to have good, open discussions about complicated or contradictory ideas. So the paleo diet people, if you disagree with me that the paleo diet is bad, I'm just not going to talk to you at all. Yeah. I can broker no dissent. I want to see no conflicting information that undermines my views. And everybody wants to be so kind of siloed off from, and Joel and I love good open debate and discussion. We really want to see whose ideas stand up to scrutiny, who really has done their homework, who can show a track record of success. Or maybe this person can point out that the track record they're claiming they have isn't actually as good a track record as they're saying they have.
Right. It's back to transparency.
Yeah, and we all benefit there, including the participants benefit. Like again, I train martial arts. I don't know how good I am until I face a credible opponent. This is one thing I hate about, the news and the presidential debacle debates, which are just dumb. It's everybody is fighting paper tigers and straw men. I was like, no, I want to fight a credible opponent. If I really believe my ideas are right, if I really believe I have a solution that will help people or that works, well, put me in the ring with somebody who's going to be a challenge. Right. And so we look at Rogue for people like that, people who are not afraid to have their ideas and their systems face significant scrutiny.
So what else happens so your upcoming food conference, the Rogue Food Conference, is in May, correct?
Yep.
And it's going to be at Joel Salatin's farm.
Yeah.
And what can people expect? I think there's still time for them to register and buy tickets. So what can they expect to get out of the experience?
Yeah. So it's 2 days. On Friday, we have a short speaking program that will happen twice. So it'll be the same speakers for about 2.5 hours twice. And the reason it's twice is because there's a bunch of farm tours that day. And yeah, if you're not on a farm tour, you're going to want to catch speakers. And there's also time just to wander around Polyface that Friday. So, last year on Friday, people just explored the farm and hiked up the mountain and just like really enjoyed kind of like a park picnic day with a tour with Joel Salatin of Polyface. And this year we added in a little bit of speakers to prep people for Saturday. And so that's Friday. Then Saturday, you show up, you have breakfast, a Polyface breakfast, right off this beautiful griddle they've built. So breakfast and lunch are included on Saturday. And then we have 6 speakers slated on Saturday. So 2 blocks of debate, one in the morning, one in the afternoon. And then Catherine Austin Fitts and Congressman Thomas Massey and a few other people speaking around those debate blocks. And we'll have a bunch of great sponsors and vendors who are going to be at the event. And then attendees this year will be receiving probably around $50 in attendee gifts that our sponsors and vendors graciously give. So you're going to walk away with a bunch of fun stuff if you come to the event.
Well, it sounds amazing. In the past, thinking back to the other Rogue Food conferences you've had so far, what are some of your favorite moments or the most transformative ideas or stories that have come out of it?
So my favorite moment is whenever people in the audience realize that things do not have to be this way, that you really can make a difference. You really can make a change. You really can beat the government. You really don't have to lay down like a dog and take your licks yet again. So Thomas Massey's talk at the very first Rogue Food, you could see that look in the audience. We had at a previous Tennessee Rogue Food, oh man, his name is going to come back to me. He had a coffee shop in Kentucky called Brood. Mm-hmm. And he was one of only 2 businesses in the entire state of Kentucky to stand up to our run-amok governor during the Rona fiasco. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Where literally in Kentucky, you could go to a strip club, but not to a coffee shop. Yeah. That's how dumb our governor was. And this guy went toe-to-toe with Governor Beshear for like well over a year. And we had him come and speak. And to see the looks on people's faces where he's like, I'm just an average guy. And here's how I went 15 rounds, old school bare knuckle boxing with the full might of a state government. Because again, he was only one of 2 people. So it was, I believe I heard that Andy Beshear created a special task force just to try and deal with this guy.
I mean, it just goes to show how they really want all of us to conform. So even one tall poppy, it has to be cut down. They want conformity across the board. So that's what I was going to ask you. So it's called the Rogue Food Conference, but obviously the ideas and the mentality can be transferred into resistance of the control grid in many other parts of our lives. So is that what happened here?
Oh, yeah. I mean, like again, the idea is we want to highlight options and ideas that work in food and farming, but that work well beyond that one narrow sector of life. Mm-hmm. Because given where we're at as a country right now, we need to start building alternative medical options because the current medical system is a complete and total failure. Yeah. Medical error is usually the second or third leading cause of death in America. And that doesn't include all of the death that the way they treat issues creates. The medical system quite likely might now be the number one cause of death in America. So we need to be working together to build alternatives in every major area of life that you can't solely take care of yourself.
Right.
I could raise a lot of my own food, but if I fall off a cliff and like shatter a bunch of bones, I can't do anything about that. And if you try and give me lavender essential oil when I'm finally well, I'm going to like punch you repeatedly. So we need, again, Joel and I really want, this idea of the alternative economy. We want to be seeding the ground in every area of the economy so that as these institutions that are crumbling all around us, the U.S. Navy posted a photo of a guy with a gun yesterday or the day before on their Instagram or Twitter or somewhere. So this is like the U.S. Navy, supposed to be one of our top branches of our military. And in the picture, the scope on the gun is installed backwards. The guy is wearing sunglasses, trying to look through a backwards scope that I think the scope still has on one of the sides, the lens cap on the scope. Like this. I mean, if this doesn't tell you just how dysfunctional and broken these institutions are at this point, I don't know what to do for you to help you realize, it's like in the Bible when God says to Israel, don't trust Egypt. Egypt is a broken reed. If you're the type of person who's running around and you're like, oh, well, the hospital will be able to save me, or the government will be able to help me, I'm just like, you might be in for some sticker shock.
Yeah. What is your future vision, your and Joel's future vision for the Rogue Food Conference? How do you see it evolving? Is it going to be the Rogue Everything Conference in the next few years?
Well, I'm already hoping to do a Rogue Finance Conference. First what I'm going to do is so the first weekend of March, most likely 2025, down in Florida, there's a beautiful 60-acre permaculture farm just outside of Orlando. And so we're going to do a 3-day Rogue Health and Wellness type conference at this permaculture farm. It's going to be for a smaller number of people. I think it's going to be all meals included. So you're going to get like 5 or 6 meals over the 3 days. And it's going to be in early March so that people can't complain that it's a bad time away to get away from their homestead or farm, because it will be March instead of May. And people will be able to make a vacation of it. And, we're going to, so I'm going to try a couple different themes and ideas. And then I want to do a Rogue Finance event as well. Because again, in like finance, you hear people talk about infinite banking. If you've ever heard about infinite banking concept, or using trusts to be able to pass assets onto your children without the government taking so much of your life's work unfairly. I'm like, these are great things. I want to learn about them, but I don't want to learn about them from an infomercial from the guy selling it to me.
Right.
I want to learn about it in an open environment where people can really challenge that guy. Well, show me where you got these numbers that your idea works. And somebody who's qualified enough can say, you really saying this is going to get 13% year over year return when quite literally the historical average is 6? And this is how you're selling. I really want that kind of opportunity to honestly talk about the benefits, the drawbacks, the costs, and whatnot of some of these different ideas. That again, people who really care are spending lots of money on pursuing these ideas. Sometimes they're finding gold. Sometimes they're finding snake oil. I was like, well, maybe we can save everybody a whole bunch of money and time and really get these things out there.
Well, it sounds amazing. It sounds like your family is ready to have you back. So maybe let's just say if people are inspired by what they just heard and want to know more about the conference or support the movement, how do they find you?
Yeah. So I'm at the Rogue Food Conference. So roguefoodconference.com. You'll find me on Facebook and Gab. On Gab, my handle is Resistance is Fertile, which is going to be the name of our upcoming podcast. And
Great.
so you can find me on Facebook just under my name. And then, this year, I'm doing a lot of speaking again this year for the first time in a number of years. So I'm going to be at Homesteaders of America. I'm going to be at Rory Feek's Homestead Festival down in Tennessee. I'm going to be at the Ohio Independence Festival. So love to connect with any of you all in person if you're at one of those events.
Fantastic. John, thank you so much. We wish you the best of luck with the conference and hope to have you back to talk about the next one coming up.
Great. Thank you so much for having me.
Great. It was our pleasure. We're so grateful to John for coming on and sharing all of that information and insights. And we hope it inspired you to maybe go look into the Rogue Food Conference. Our goal here is to bring you amazing guests like John every week, and we couldn't do it without your help and support. So please give us a like, give us a share on this channel, and also head over to collapselife.substack.com, sign up for our newsletter, and join the Collapse Life community. If you're on Twitter, we're also there at collapse_life. If this is your first time joining us, we want to welcome you and thank you for being here. Collapse Life is your home for information to help you understand and prepare for our changing world. We like to call it a lifestyle channel for a dying lifestyle. We hope to see you again next week. And until then, just remember, keep your chin up. It's only collapse. See you soon.